So hey guys, like I said, we'll be talking about forms today. And forms, what are forms? Forms are basically what we use to retrieve data or information from the user. So let's think of forms as we've all worked with forms in our lives, right? We've all used forms, whether physically on websites, on apps. What you use to log into Facebook, your name and your email and password, that's a form that collects it. Most times you see contact forms on web pages that ask you for your name, your email, blah blah blah. Anything that just lets the user provide an information is basically a form, right? So HTML forms serve the purpose of collecting information, which is later sent back to the server for proper operation. It's important that the form provided in HTML is paired with some server-side code, usually called processing agents, that will be responsible for receiving and processing the information as the author sees fit. This process may consist of, for example, saving the information received by sending it by email. So for example, right, what they're saying is usually when you receive when a user inputs a form, what happens? There has to be something that happens on the server side, right? What is done with that information. So usually the most common way in which people receive information from their forms. Let's say for example I have a website now, right? Which I do, and people come and they fill my form. For example, people come to contact and they fill the form. What happens is that I get an instant notification on my phone that someone has filled the form, and not just that, I get it with the form details. So I see the person's name, the email, the subject, and the message. So that way I can choose to either respond immediately or discard it as something that is not important to get. So that's what they're basically trying to explain as the server side interaction. So sometimes it doesn't go to email, you store it on your server and decide what to do with it. Sometimes you just add it directly to your newsletter and all that stuff, right? So a form is basically a container for controls. Each control is a form. In a form is thought to collect information input by users in ways that go from text lines to file uploads through options, dates, passwords, and many more, right? So these are just different types of forms, like form types that you can have. Someone can either choose to upload a file, can have a list of stuff, dates, password, many more. Like there's just a lot of stuff, even phone numbers. So once users have filled the form with data, they can submit it back to the server in order to let the processing agent administrate the gathered information. But I'm basically saying once the user has submitted the form, it is now left for whatever you programmed it to do to happen. So if you want an email to be sent, perfect, that will be sent. If you want it to be stored in the database, that will be done too. So that's basically it. The following code shows the basic structure of a form, which is opening and closing tags, wrapping a set of controls. Right, so like they explained, forms basically containing different controls, right? So it usually starts with the opening tag and the closing tag of the name form, right? But this model says nothing about how the form is going to be processed and where. Such information can be provided with attributes like action, which indicates the location of the processing agent, method, which determines the method used to pack form data before it's sent to the processing agent, and target, which indicates where the processing will be displayed. Here we'll talk about the action attribute alone, leaving the other two to be analyzed in the reference of form. The following form has been declared with the URL of a processing agent in the action attribute. You can see the processing agent taking over in the menu when you submit the form. So basically what they are saying is when you submit a form, usually nothing will happen if you don't specify the action that should happen, and the action is specified using the action attributes, right? And as you can see, if you look closely, you will notice that in this action there's a file path specified, and the file name is form result.php target blank, right? This just creates a blank. It takes the user to a new page, and it creates a file form results.php, right? Basically, that's the action. So basically, it's PHP is what we use for backend a lot of times, and we're not yet going into that. We're just knowing how to create forms with HTML. Eventually, when we can create forms, then we'll talk about how we can do form action and target and all those stuff, right? So let's go ahead and start trying this out. Thank God now we can just copy this to avoid typing too much, right? So just copy it. We'll come to Sublime Text, and as usual, new file. I'll just so I specified HTML here, so let's do that. This is very ugly. Way better. So let's save this. Then we can open it up. Okay. See that we just have a button here. We go back to our HTML, you see that what we did was we created a form, but inside the form we really have one input type, which is a button, because the type is submit, right? So this is what we use to submit the form, and the value here is submit the form, which is what you see written here, submit the form. So if we click on submit the form, you see it says your file couldn't be accessed because of why. We have a file here specified that we don't have in our document, right? And if you look closely, when we click on it, it takes us to another tab. That is this target here. That's what it is used for. So basically, we do not have any PHP file here, so we'll just delete this. So while working with our form, we will not be using any of that. So yeah, so let's start. Let me X this and this, and refresh this. You should get a blank page. Why isn't it blank? So okay, it's not saved. It's perfect. So now going back to our document, we have text controls, right? So text controls provide the means to collect textual data like names, directions, recipes, phrases, messages, passwords, etc. In the following sections, we'll analyze the two most used and basic text control. So we have number one being single line text input. A single line text input, which allows only one line of text to be entered, is one of the many controls that's declared with the input element. In this case, the input element should present the value text in the type attribute. With this alone, the control is already visible, but a name is needed if there's an intention to gather the data entered by the user in this control. So let me go ahead and just quickly write this so we can say input. Now we specify the type as text if we want a single line input, right? And if I save this, even though I did not put anything in the name, you should see something here. You have a text input here, right? So we can type in text here. But if you have plans to gather the information, then you can now specify. So let's just say first name, add this in between because we don't want spaces, right? So when we are retrieving the data, you will not just see a name and be wondering what's happening here. You will see first name, then the name, right? So that's the use of adding the name to the form. Okay, the value of the name attribute will identify server side the user's input in the control. The following example shows a basic implementation of a text input. Additionally, we are enclosing the control and its label in the paragraph, as this too can be considered to conform a unit with an idea that separates it from the rest, right? Okay, so perfect. Let me just grab this. Okay, let me grab all of this. So you can see here that the basically difference with what they did is that they added a text so that the user knows what they are filling in. Because the way we did it, you just see a form input, you don't know what you're supposed to type there, right? But with this now, it's clear. So there's a paragraph that contains the input and some text here. Enter your full name. Then we have the input type submit, which is to submit the form. So if I save it and then we view this, you should see enter your full name, then a space to type in the full name, then send data, right? So that's basically how it's done. Then you can just remove this. Right, so that is single line inputs. Because as you can see here, it only gives you one line to work with, right? So proceeding, we have what we call multi-line text inputs. This type of control is very similar to the single line text input, but it has the particularity of allowing multiple lines of text to be entered. A multi-line text control is usually rendered as a box, tall enough to contain more than one line of text at the same time. This representation usually provides a scroll bar mechanism to allow users to see all entered text, particularly when it's long enough to exceed the box boundaries. A multi-line text input is inserted with the text area element. Like before, the name attribute provides a name for the control that will help processing agents to identify the data submitted by the user. In the following example, we are improving the previous form to allow both types of text strings, single line and multi-line, to be entered. The example proposed each control adapts better to the type of data it's supposed to collect. So let me just grab this. Right, so this is what we need, and I'll just come underneath here, paste it. Grab this from here. So what we have now is we've added a multi-line input. So let's save that and see what it looks like. Good, we see that we have multiple lines that we can work with, right? Okay, so a mistake. Oh, I copied the wrong stuff. Okay, I'll just grab this one here. Sorry. Perfect. So sorry. Okay, it did not exist. Okay, so yeah, that's how it's supposed to look. So the only difference between this and this is that you see that this is just one line and this you have multiple lines to work with. And let's say we have a lot of text here. We paste it here. We see that we can scroll through it, right, to see the amount of text that is there. And we can also resize it. I can resize it to be like this. I can resize it. I can leave it like this. I can scroll with this and use just my mouse. Basically, that's how it works. So how we do that is that we use the text area instead of input for this. See this one, we use inputs and type text. Here we use text area, and there's no need for us to specify a type. Right, we just give it a name, message. Right, so that's how it works. Let's go back to our document. Then we have what we call option controls. These controls allow users to select one or more options from a list of predefined values. Option controls can be presented in different styles and with different mechanisms of interaction with the user, depending mainly on the element utilized. A list of options can be declared in three ways: with checkboxes, with radio buttons, and with lists. So basically, option controls is the type of form that you have where you get to select an option, basically. So let's say you're filling a form, they might ask you male or female. You select either male or female, right? Or they might ask you what language did you speak, and you can select multiple, maybe English and Hausa, or English and Yoruba, or English, Igbo and Yoruba. So you can choose definitely more than one, right? Then you might also have an option that says from a drop down that tells you what country are you from. Then you have a list of all the countries in the world. You get to pick your countries. And these are the common ways in which these three forms of option controls are implemented. We have checkboxes, we have radio buttons, and we have lists, right? A checkbox is a particular type of option that can be checked or unchecked upon user interaction, meaning a user can click, check it, or click it again to uncheck it. This allows authors to collect data like preferences, acceptance of terms and conditions, categories, or any subjects that can be answered with yes or no. One thing this control has in particular is that even when it can be declared as part of a thematic group, each checkbox is independent from all other checkboxes in the form. Checkboxes are represented by the input element when it has the value checkbox in the type attribute. Here, the value of the name attribute also plays a role by identifying the option server side. In the following example, a few checkboxes have been declared as part of a thematic group of options. Remember that this aggregation is only made by theme and position, right? The selection of checkboxes continues to be independent. So yeah, basically what they did was to create a list that you can easily check. So let me just grab this and we'll add it under the message. Now add a comment here. So we have checkbox. See, also have a paragraph here, and we specify a break tag here so that everything starts on a new line, right? We put another break tag here so that it starts on a new line, another one here so that it starts on a new line. And what we have here is basically inputs. It's a single tag. It does not have any opening or closing. I'm sure you should have noticed by now it's a standalone tag, right? I don't really need to explain this again. We should have already gotten it by now. It has the attribute type of checkbox. And this is what tells your browser that it is checkbox. Then we have a name, right? Then you see the name here, movies. So server side, when you receive this information, you can tell that okay, person checked movies, the person did not check sports, or the person checked sports, the person did not check video games. That's the advantage, or that's the use of writing the name, right? So try and always include that, because in real life scenarios it will be very useful. Although now we're not really collecting the data, we're just learning how to put the forms, right? So go ahead and see what it looks like. Great. So see we have our checkboxes here, right? So we can uncheck, uncheck, uncheck. So that's basically how checkboxes work. And what differs checkboxes from radio buttons is that you can select more than one. So I can select all, I can select two, I can select one. Right? For radio buttons, you can only select one option out of the two or more that you are given. Right? So that's basically how checkboxes work. Moving on. Okay, so it says a couple of things can be noted in this previous example. The first one is the lack of association between the checkbox and the text that describes it. In other words, the impossibility of activating the checkbox by clicking the associated text, meaning you cannot click this checkbox by clicking movies or sports or video games, right? You have to click the box itself. So this is something that can easily remedy, converting the text into a label for your control. So we'll talk about this later on, right? So when we do that, whenever you click on movies, it will select the box. So we'll discuss that subsequently. We'll use what we call label. It's an element too. The second one is about checkbox data and is received server side. If you submit the form, you only see the selected checkboxes assigned to the processing agent, their value. That depends very much on the language used, server size. So basically what they are saying is that only the box that you checked will be sent to the server, God. And basically the value depends very much on the language. So there are very much different languages to use for your server-side applications. You can use JavaScript, you can use Python, you can use PHP, you can use Ruby on Rails. So that's a lot. So how that data is represented depends on the language that you're using. So we have radio buttons, right? I'm not really a fan of all these long texts and text. I just like to write stuff, try stuff out, right? But I guess it's important to understanding how they work. So while checkboxes are independent and be declared on your own, radio buttons are options that need to be grouped in order to have a meaning. Only one option can be selected at a time, I told you earlier. This means, among other things, that when you select one option, the previous selected options get deselected. The radio button is also declared with the input element, but with the value radio instead of checkbox. So here things get a little different from what happened in checkboxes, because the value of the name attribute needs to be shared by all the options in the same group. In other words, this is the mechanism that needs to be used in order to create a group of radio buttons. So unlike in checkboxes where we have different names here, radio buttons we have the same name, right? That's basically what they're saying. But then where is the value that tells the processing agent what option in the group has been selected? You know, we said that when it comes to the name, the reason why we'll add it is that, for example, when the user selects movies and the data gets sent to the server side, the name will now be what to identify it. Okay, movies checked. But if we are giving all of them the same name in radio buttons, how do we now identify the one that was selected by the user in the server side? Right? So that's the question. So it says where the answer to this question is in the value attribute, as the purpose of this attribute is to identify options in a group. Its value should be different for each option. In the following example, a group of radio buttons have been declared to conform a group where only one option can be selected. Something that absolutely makes sense in this context. For this purpose, all the buttons share the same name and each have a different value. So that basically means instead of using name for radio buttons, we use value. Values and other attributes, right? Value. Okay. Value. That's basically I write it, right? Value. So let us go back and see the example they gave here. So we can just grab this. And put it here. Then I'll just grab this and indent it so it's easy to read. And a comment here. Perfect. So what we have here is our radio button, and if you notice, they all have the same name: income, 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 right? So now how we identify radio buttons in the server side is by using the value instead of name, because they are all grouped together. So this is how it works. If you give them different names, just like how we did for checkboxes, you'll be able to select each one. So let me just demonstrate that, right? If I clean something here, clean something here. So what's going on? So let me clean this. If I save this and I go back to this and I refresh, see we have 3 radio buttons and everything looks alright, but if I click on this, it selects. If I click on this, it selects. If I click on this, it selects. But that's not how radio buttons are supposed to work, right? They are all supposed to, you're only supposed to be able to select one option. So when I click on one and I try and click on another one, it should deselect the first one I clicked on. So how we achieve that is by making sure that they all have the same name. So that groups them together. So let me do this. So now that they all have the same name, if I save this, come here and refresh. If I click lower than 1000, select. If I click this, this is no longer selected, and now this is selected. If I click this, you see. So this is basically why we give all of them the same name. But now that they have the same name, how I did now identify the server side, right? When someone selects and fills the form, how do we know what they selected? That's where the value comes in. So this value is now what is attached to the inputs that the user gives. I says, okay, this user selected lower than 1000, or from 1000 to 5000, or higher than 5000, right? So yeah, that's basically how checkbox, that's basically how radio buttons work.